Everybody's so quiet. So welcome. I've got a few people I think that might still straggle in, but that's fine. So welcome to the PMI Victorian History Library. I'm Judith Ellis and I'm President of the Library and Chair of the Library Board. And a very special welcome to our guest tonight, Dr. Ross McMullin. And I'd also like to acknowledge one of our board members who's here tonight, so Dennis Correll. If you've not met him before, please make yourself known. And thank you to Lauren at the back and Aaron here, our staff who are helping us tonight. So our library is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also to any Aboriginal elders of communities who may be here or watching. How many of you are here for the first time? Quite a few, lovely. Welcome, hope we see you back. We have lots on, so do check the website. The library here is called Paran, it's home since 1854, and we're the second oldest public library in Victoria. We have a collection of over 70,000 items in various formats, and we take pride in being the sole library in Australia with such a specialised Victorian collection available for loan. And our focus is very much on local history, housing a wealth of information encompassing most towns and diverse communities throughout the state. Just a few admin things before we start. Bathrooms are on the other side of that wall, so out through the door there, do a U-turn and it's there, or through this door and turn left. Emergency exits, again similar, out through that door, or this door and turn right. And in unlikely event of an emergency, our staff will make sure that we exit the building safely. We will be taking photos and, of course, video tonight. So if anybody doesn't want to be in a photo or video, please let us know and we can accommodate that. And one other minor admin thing, if you haven't already done it, today is Census Day. It's very easy to do online, so if you haven't, you'll need to go home and do it. So our guest tonight, Dr. Ross McMullin, is an award-winning historian, a biographer, a storyteller for sure, and you'll hear some tonight, whose latest book, The Light on the Hill, is an updated history of the Australian Labor Party. So the first edition covers the first 100 years of the ALP, from 1891 to 1991, and Ross has now updated that to pretty well the current day, up to the last election.
And beyond.
So up to the current day. And the new edition, which of course is here tonight, was launched by Anthony Albanese at the ALP's 50th National Conference in Adelaide last month. And then there was another small launch in Melbourne just last week. So this book is hot off the press. So in a delightful way and through his storytelling, Ross in the book uncovers the thrilling highs and the deepest lows, the stunning successes and monumental failures of Australia's oldest political party. So we look forward to hearing those stories, warts and all. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Judith. Don't forget your drink. So thanks again to Judith for that introduction. This new book, The Light on the Hill, is an updated and revised expansion of my centenary ALP history that was published in 1991, as Judith said, 35 years ago, so plenty of Labor history to incorporate since then. My priorities in writing it have not changed. As the preface says, the fundamental aim, as before, has been to write the rich, dense history of the ALP compellingly and accurately while maximising liveliness and readability. The Light on the Hill tells the story of Australia's oldest and most resilient and significant political party through the people who shaped it. Not only those who were prominent, but also its members and supporters, and covers their triumphs and setbacks in all states and nationally. A recurring theme is the tension between what the ALP's prominent politicians were doing or not doing and what the rank and file activists wanted them to be doing. So that's an unquote from the preface. When I was appointed as the party's historian over 40 years ago, I was encouraged from the outset to make it warts and all. That's what I did. It is warts and all, very much. My independence as a historian was respected throughout, both during the 1980s and again last year. The only time what I'd written was queried was not because of my coverage of Labor warts, but when an expert defamation lawyer was consulted because I'd written so scathingly about two anti-Labor identities I disliked. Another word I could use is loathed. Who were they? Bjelke Petersen and Garfield Barwick. I was confident that what I'd written was fine, historically and legally, and the defamation expert in the end agreed. So, warts and all, and maximising liveliness and readability, which included maximising a sense of flow by weaving coverage of the states seamlessly into federal developments as the story progresses. At the same time, though, I was conscious that it was the party's official history, so where I was writing about the ALP's many internal upheavals, I should strive to cover the turbulence even-handedly to avoid any perception that I was some kind of factional warrior, because I'm not. Notable instances in the new book, for example, are those fierce leadership contests, Hawke, Keating and Rudd-Gillard. Establishing what happened when Gillard challenged Rudd in mid-2010 was not easy. Again, the priorities were accuracy, even-handedness and vivid warts-and-all storytelling. An early draft I wrote said this: Victorian MPs were also influential in the anti-Rudd stampede, notably Shorten. Once the momentum was underway on the 23rd of June, Shorten played a vital recruiting role in maximising Gillard's support. It was spontaneous, he maintained afterwards, as did other prime movers and Gillard herself. Unquote. Now, my narrative then proceeded to cover what unfolded on that fateful day. Meanwhile, I kept reading and thinking. Eventually, I decided to adjust what I'd written by inserting a new paragraph. Immediately following the sentence I've just read, it was spontaneous, Shorten maintained afterwards, as did other prime movers and Gillard herself. I inserted this new bit. But how spontaneous was it? 8 days earlier, Shorten had urged Gillard to consider pursuing the leadership in view of the party's perturbing electoral prospects. 8 weeks earlier, Agriculture Minister Tony Burke had supportively alluded to a leadership change during a conversation with Gillard. During these and other interactions, as her own staffer, Jerry Kitchener, conceded, quote, obviously she was in a position to rule it out categorically, and she didn't. Indeed, before the caucus revolt, perhaps weeks before, another Gillard staffer was drafting a speech for her to deliver when she became Prime Minister. Moreover, according to Martin Ferguson, 3 days before the insurgency, Gillard kept prodding him about one thing, a change of leader, during a flight to Canberra. Also several days beforehand, according to Jim Chalmers, there was then Wayne Swan's Chief of Staff, Swan was notified by someone he considered highly credible that a leadership challenge was likely the following week. In 2012, Graham Richardson said during a Four Corners television interview that he knew about the rebellion a week or two before it occurred. Gillard admitted on Four Corners in 2011 that she had come to her decision to seek the leadership very, very slowly. I'm still reading this extract from the book. Very, very slowly. But whenever she reached it, whether it was hours or days or weeks before the caucus upheaval on the 23rd of June, the crucial factor in the extraordinary surge was her own imprimatur. Gillard had options. She could have refused outright. Alternatively, she could have waited. She could have postponed her decision about whether to proceed and reconsidered it after the approaching election, provided Labor won it. Instead, she fatefully decided to confirm her willingness to be associated with the insurrection. Quoting, "I take responsibility for my actions. I've never tried to suggest that I was inveigled or persuaded or anything like that by others," said Gillard. "You couldn't make a bigger decision and you couldn't have felt more lonely in the moment than I did." Okay, so that's the end of that extract about the insurgency and the extent of Gillard's knowledge beforehand. So, aiming at warts-and-all storytelling that's even-handed as well as accurate and also as vivid as I could make it. But it's not just updated. I revised the content of the 1991 book as well. That book naturally included coverage of the furious reaction of rank-and-file Labor supporters, including me, to the 1975 dismissal of the Whitlam government. I expanded this in the new book, including this, inserting this in the new book. In inner Sydney, a 12-year-old schoolboy who had handed out ALP how to vote cards 3 years earlier, so when he was 9, was so infuriated by the dismissal that he walked out of school, joined protests in the city and got home really late that day. His name was Anthony Albanese. Like the PM, I've also been a fervent Labor supporter ever since I was a teenager. As a law student, my favourite subject was constitutional law because of its connection to politics and history, and also because the lecturer enabled 100% assessment to be determined by a single large essay on a topic chosen by the student. This lecturer was a highly talented young expert you might have heard of, named Gareth Evans. We students sometimes found his lectures cancelled because he was suddenly required in Canberra to assist with the latest political drama involving the Whitlam government and its colourful Attorney-General Lionel Murphy. For my essay topic, I chose a notable High Court case in 1932 involving a fierce clash between the anti-Labor federal government and the New South Wales government headed by Jack Lang. I enjoyed delving into the political background that culminated in the controversial case. When Gareth examined my essay, 53 years ago now, he delivered a verdict that has stayed with me ever since. Good rousing politics and history, but not enough law. Thankfully, I ended up becoming a historian instead of a lawyer, and I've certainly endeavoured to make this book, The Light on the Hill, good rousing politics and history. It's a wonderful story with so many vibrant characters. Vivid anecdotes abound. One of my favourites illuminates the party's origins in 1891, when Labor emerged with startling suddenness in New South Wales by winning 35 seats and the balance of power at an election, and at the same year the very same year, a shearers' strike in Queensland was repressed so outrageously by pastoralists who held senior positions in the government and judiciary, or were closely connected to those who did, that it prompted the labour movement to pursue its own representation in these spheres. The Queensland government's conduct in 1891 was extraordinary. It unearthed an obscure 1825 English conspiracy law which had been repealed in England but not in Queensland, and urgently told police and magistrates in central Queensland about it. About 200 strikers, including all the leaders, were systematically arrested on charges of conspiracy, intimidation and riot. Many were humiliated and dragged around in chains. One judge abused the police for not opening fire on assembled unionists, bullied the jury for 3 days until it provided a guilty verdict, ignored its recommendation for clemency, and sentenced 12 strike leaders to 3 years jail for conspiracy. Amazing stuff, yeah? Among these 12 leaders was Bill Hamilton, who was sentenced to 3 years at notorious St Helena prison, even though he had tried to prevent illegal acts by the aggrieved strikers. Having served his full term, Hamilton later became a Labor MP and eventually a minister. When his ministerial duties involved an inspection of St Helena, the warders and flunkies were eager to please with, "Careful, sir, mind the step, sir," until Hamilton silenced them. "I know where the bloody steps are. I scrubbed them for 3 years." The brutal crushing of the 1891 strike had other profound consequences as well as the ALP's formation. Some prominent activists concluded that the oppression and injustice so evident in the crushing of the strike indicated there was no way a progressive Labor Party could ever be able to flourish in Australia, and so it would be better to pursue this somewhere else. The upshot was the idealistic creation of the New Australia Cooperative Settlement Association under William Lane that culminated in more than 400 people departing from Australia to form a new settlement at faraway Paraguay. Anyone familiar with that? Yeah, some of you would have. Yeah. This extraordinary endeavour did not succeed, and various factors contributed to this. But I'd like to focus tonight on one aspect, the remarkable story of Walter Head. Walter Head was the treasurer of the New Australia Cooperative Settlement Association. He was a highly capable journalist, Bush Union leader and Labor activist who shared the ideals of the New Australia movement and was all set to go to Paraguay with his wife and their 7 children. But a terrible tragedy intervened. His young son Roland became lost in the Gippsland bush and was never found. Then his eldest son Wally proceeded to Paraguay without the rest of the family, and he never returned. And playing casual social cricket in Paraguay not long after arriving there, was bowling to William Lane's young son and happened to hit him on the chest, with tragically fatal consequences. As well, the New Australia movement was bedevilled with financial problems, and Walter Head, as treasurer, was falsely accused of embezzlement. As a result of all this turmoil, his marriage collapsed and he disappeared. He evidently went to New Zealand and resided there in obscurity for a year or more. In 1895, he re-emerged in Tasmania with a new name. He now called himself Walter Woods. He settled there, immersed himself in its Labor Party and became a prime mover in it. As the accomplished journalist he had always been, Walter Woods became the influential editor of Tasmanian Labor's newspaper. He also became a prominent Labor MP in the Tasmanian Parliament for 17 years, married the sister of a well-known caucus colleague, and proceeded to have a second family with her, including a son who became a Rhodes Scholar. The little-known story of Walter Head, who became Walter Woods, is fascinating and one of my favourites. The Light on the Hill is not just about leaders like Rudd and Gillard and ministers like Bill Hamilton and Gareth Evans and prominent MPs like Walter Woods. It also includes other favourite anecdotes of mine, including this one about a Labor supporter from the West Australian goldfields named Jack Carroll. He was quirky and taciturn. When he enlisted in World War I, because his army comrades reckoned he hardly said anything other than yes or no, they nicknamed him Referendum Carroll. Referendum Carroll turned out to be an outstanding frontline soldier, and he was awarded the Victoria Cross for his extraordinary exploits at Messines. He was pleased about this award, but not at all thrilled about having to visit Buckingham Palace so the King could formally present it to him. So he didn't go. On the day, Referendum Carroll was nowhere to be seen. Another appointment was scheduled, but the same thing happened. He didn't turn up. And a third time, when again he didn't attend. Miffed dignitaries and military superiors were now sufficiently aggrieved to resort to coercive action to ensure Carroll attended the fourth attempt to present him with his VC. This time they succeeded. He did put in an appearance, but he had a surprise in store for them. During this protracted presentation process, he had somehow ascertained that VC winners had certain esoteric entitlements. Among them was the right to direct the Buckingham Palace Guard to parade. So Referendum Carroll, the labourer from the West Australian goldfields recovering from a recently broken leg, amused himself and stunned onlookers by calling out the Buckingham Palace Guard and putting it through its paces. There is apparently no record of King George's reaction. So, The Light on the Hill not only covers all the significant history that you'd expect it to cover, but a great deal more as well. There's plenty, of course, on Labor's fine leader during World War II, John Curtin, but the book also features his closest mate, Frank Hyatt. Anyone heard of Frank Hyatt? Frank Hyatt was more equipped to be Labor's leader and Prime Minister than Curtin was, but he died of Spanish flu after catching it in Sydney when playing cricket for Victoria as the state team's wicketkeeper. Curtin was shattered. Hyatt and Curtin had both been protégés of Frank Anstey. Frank Anstey, another favourite of mine. Frank Anstey, the left-wing orator who was a Labor MP and close to the notorious John Wren. Anstey, Curtin and Hyatt were prominent in the ALP's successful era before World War I, when Australian Labor led the world. Australian Labor led the world. It is little known now, but the first Labor governments anywhere were in Australia. The first was formed in Queensland in 1899 and lasted only 6 days before the anti-Labor parties hastily settled their differences that had enabled Labor to get a brief taste of government. The initial national Labor government, led by Australia's third Prime Minister, Chris Watson, took office in 1904. it endured an immediate barrage of hostility. This intense criticism was surely more severe than any Australian government had ever received before even doing anything. A typical example was the title of my book about the Watson government, So Monstrous a Travesty. So Monstrous a Travesty, which is visible at the front of those books on display there, which is very good to see. Nevertheless, the competence displayed by Watson and his ministers during their 4 months in office, until their opponents resorted to a dodgy parliamentary stunt to remove them, accustomed voters to Labor governments and paved the way for more of them. 6 years later, the ALP under Andrew Fisher became the world's first majority national Labor government after a superb victory at the 1910 federal election that remains among the party's most notable triumphs in its long history. With a majority in the Senate, as well as the House of Representatives, the Fisher government proceeded to enact far more legislation than any previous federal ministry. A Labor enthusiast at that time, a Labor enthusiast later reminisced about what it felt like to be fervently attached to the ALP at that time. Quoting here, there was a mystical element, quite unknown to members of other political bodies, a crusading quality in the Labor Party that produced in people of imagination a sense of knight-errantry, of riding forth on a charger to right the wrongs of the world, unquote. But the ALP's unique progress did have a downside. When the calamity of World War I emerged in 1914, Labor was in office under Fisher. Equivalent parties elsewhere merely had to react to their respective government's administration of the war. Only in Australia did Labor have the onerous undertaking of directing the nation's involvement in a conflagration far beyond anyone's expectation or experience. And the upshot was a catastrophic rupture. Escalating divisiveness over conscription culminated in a devastating split, which remains, in my view, the most severe in the party's long history. The era of the ALP leading the world was over. Labor did not manage to form another national government for 13 long years, and this Scullin government had been in office for only 5 minutes when it was hit by the Great Depression. Without a Senate majority, and with a notoriously anti-Labor Conservative in charge of the Commonwealth Bank, the Scullin government felt powerless to alleviate the Depression's terrible hardships for so many Australians, and the acute frustration and dismay in caucus led to another devastating party split. Scullin's Minister for Health and Repatriation, Curtin's hero Frank Anstey, contended that there was something Labor could do. And the Light on the Hill quotes what he urged his cabinet colleagues to do at a very early stage. That puts the lid on us. We are going to be blockaded not only by a hostile Senate, but by a hostile bank board. There's only one way to save our lives: force a double dissolution before the tide of popularity runs from under us. But Anstey's recommendation was not heeded, and he became very bitter about the ensuing powerlessness of the Scullin government. And this parliamentary outburst was typical Anstey. This is the annihilation of everything that the Labor Party has produced during 2 long generations. This government has, that's the Scullin government, this government has, since it took office, pursued a policy of drift. It has suffered ignominy upon ignominy. But are we justified in spitting upon the altar of Labor simply because others may. That is not the path of salvation. This government is crucifying the very people who raised its members from obscurity and placed them in power. Anstey also described bankers and financiers as cormorants and vultures whose sole aim is to devour the living standards of the Australian workers. And Anstey had been, not long before, Labor's deputy leader. Wonderful character, Frank Anstey, and he certainly provided superb content for their story. But the upshot of the Scullin government's ignominious failure was that Labor was in opposition federally for another extended period, almost a decade, until the Curtin government took office in 1941 with World War II underway. Kevin Rudd and his senior ministers were well aware of the potential parallels with Scullin's ill-fated government when the global financial crisis hit 5 minutes after they took office in 2007. In contrast to this perturbing Scullin precedent, the Rudd government responded to the crisis boldly and more effectively than anywhere in the world. An outstanding achievement. Now back to Curtin and World War II. Now, Curtin's transformation as leader of the ALP in Australia in World War II was remarkable. Before becoming PM in 1941, he had been diffident and unconfident about his capacity to lead the nation during this global conflict. The attitude of his prominent colleague, Bert Evatt, widely known as Doc, could not have been more different. This is not, I should emphasise, the later ineffective Doc Evatt, whose political career was ruptured by Labor's bitter split of the 1950s, but the brilliant, extraordinary Doc Evatt of the 1930s, who seemed to Labor supporters, many of them bruised by the ordeal of the Great Depression and the Scullin government's inability to alleviate it, Doc Evatt seemed to them the very embodiment of that stirring quote about knight-errantry and riding forth on a charger to right the wrongs of the world. Doc Evatt became a High Court judge at the remarkable age of 36 and delivered visionary judgments during the 1930s before resigning from the court to become the ALP's candidate in a non-Labor seat, resigned from the court to become a candidate in a non-Labor seat at the 1940 federal election. Evatt won that marginal seat, and the result overall was extremely close, with the anti-Labor coalition remaining vulnerably in office with the support of 2 independent MPs. The Doc was fervently keen to maximise pressure on the government and to pursue the support of the crucial independents, and was baffled by the contrasting diffidence of Curtin that stemmed from his grave doubts about whether he could measure up as an effective wartime leader. Late in 1940, a by-election eventuated in the Western Australian seat of Swan when a veteran Country Party MP died. If Labor could capture the seat, a federal Labor government would surely follow. Evatt was itching to head west and launch the campaign of his life. Curtin, in contrast, did not go at all. He was in poor health and was also grieving the recent death of Frank Anstey. Curtin also had misgivings about Labor's candidate in Swan, as did others in the party. So, Evatt headed off on the long rail trip to WA with just a solitary assistant, Alan Fraser, and proceeded to launch a whirlwind superhuman campaign. He was optimistic about the by-election result when he and Fraser began the return rail journey. And as the train pulled in at Kalgoorlie, Fraser was abruptly woken by Evatt, who was shouting, "We've won! We've won! Listen to the cheers!" There was indeed a large excited crowd on the platform, and Evatt had concluded that they must be saluting him as the Labor hero who had single-handedly won a famous victory that would usher in a Labor government. Alas, the heroes the crowd was welcoming were footballers returning after a celebrated triumph, and Labor had in fact lost in Swan. However, Labor did become Australia's national government a year later, when Evatt became both Attorney-General and External Affairs Minister, a heavy load, especially in wartime, but very welcome to the remarkable Doc. As for Curtin's misgivings about becoming PM in wartime, he was transformed by the transition to government. Now, just quoting a paragraph from my book, the new book. Curtin surprised himself and others aware of his anxiety about not measuring up as a war leader. In his integrity, oratory, commitment, and his ability to get quickly to the core of a problem, he had displayed ample aptitude for the position. Now, in office, he also found the inner strength to sustain him through difficult, momentous decisions and the endless administrative grind. At times he still worried terribly, but the doubts and diffidence of opposition days disappeared. Instead, he soon became unexpectedly assured in his new role. So that's the end of a little quote there from the book. Japan's devastating attack at Pearl Harbor occurred shortly after Curtin became PM. With many Australians understandably alarmed about what might follow, Curtin delivered a straightforward yet inspiring national broadcast. Men and women of Australia, he began, we did not want war in the Pacific, but we are now called upon to meet the external aggressor. We Australians have imperishable traditions. We shall maintain them. We shall vindicate them. We shall hold this country and keep it as a citadel for the British-speaking race and as a place where civilisation will persist. News then reached, unquote, news then reached Australia of the sinking of two powerful British battleships that were supposed to be reinforcing Singapore. With Australians feeling even more vulnerable, Curtin made another public statement. Enemy striking power in the air has given to the enemy an initial momentum which only a maximum effort can arrest, he declared, adding to counter despondency that nobody worries about being a few goals down at half time. I do like those last words. Brilliant. Curtin benefited from having other capable ministers besides Evatt. His treasurer and his successor as leader was Ben Chifley, who made various iconic speeches referring to his sense of Labor's noble objective, the fundamental goal of a more equal, just and tolerant society for all Australians, as the light on the hill. This phrase resonated with Labor enthusiasts, especially because no ALP leader embodied the ideals of the party in his everyday dealings with people more than Chief. I decided at an early stage in the 1980s that I wanted the title of my ALP history to be The Light on the Hill, and I had to contend with pronounced hostility to this from the publisher of the 1991 book. Within the ALP, however, it was a different story, and especially after the book was published. And ever since, it has been clear that The Light on the Hill was highly appropriate as the title. Decades after Chifley's death, his evocative phrase was highlighted by Gough Whitlam at a celebrated event. This was the rapturous campaign climax shortly before the 1972 election that was to usher in the Whitlam government and make him Labor's first PM since Chifley 23 years earlier. Thousands of Melbourne's Labor faithful crammed into St Kilda Town Hall 2 days before election day, including me as well. You too, yeah, I was there too. Front right corner. Were you there? In Whitlam's speech, he said, "The light on the hill had almost gone out. Let us set it aflame again." Along with Chifley and Evatt, another highly capable minister in the Curtin government was Jack Deadman, though his name is less familiar today. He entered Parliament by winning a by-election as the Labor candidate for the seat of Corio in 1940, when Robert Menzies, the anti-Labor Prime Minister, tried to persuade Corio's electors not to vote for Deadman by claiming Hitler's eyes are on Corio. I've always thought this was remarkably fatuous. Hitler's eyes are on Corio. No wonder Deadman won. Deadman was very dedicated and competent. He admired Curtin, and the admiration was mutual, and he was keen to assist Curtin any way he could. As Minister for War, Organisation of Industry, Deadman was completely dedicated to diverting Australia's non-essential resources to the war effort, but his approach was earnest and humourless. He had a dour Scottish accent, and public relations techniques were a closed book to him. Curtin could proclaim, as he frequently did, the virtues of austerity without losing any of his lustre as a notable war leader, a noble war leader, exhorting the unpalatable in the interests of victory. It was completely different when Deadman, who was inspired by identical ideals, announced that women's clothing would be restricted to 3 basic sizes, men's clothing would be standardised to the basic victory suit and shirts with shortened tails, and a variety of other commodities would be rationed or banned altogether. Especially notorious was Deadman's attempt to curb excessive consumer spending by banning Christmas advertising. This decision made Deadman the killer of Santa Claus, and Deadman became the most unpopular personality in Australia. Seriously. After World War II, there was further turbulent divisiveness in the ALP. Rampant sectarianism was instrumental in another traumatic Labor split. In this phase of the party's history, Pat Kennelly was an astute and influential power broker with the most notorious stutter in the Labor movement. He concluded that in the Melbourne seat of Albert Park, during this era of unedifying sectarianism, Labor's prospects would be hampered if its candidate was a Catholic. A quiet, bookish university graduate named Frank Crean had nominated for pre-selection in Albert Park. All Kennelly knew about him was his name on the nomination form, Francis Daniel Crean, which prompted Kennelly to conclude that Crean sounded suspiciously like a Catholic and therefore not suitable for Albert Park. Kennelly decided to visit this stranger, Francis Daniel Crean, who was in fact a Presbyterian Sunday school teacher, though Kennelly, of course, was unaware of this. They had a yarn. Kennelly took his time before delicately approaching the vital question: was Crean a Catholic? When Crean replied that he wasn't, Kennelly, immensely relieved, blurted out, "From now on, you're Frank Crean. You've got to cut out the Francis bloody Daniel." Crean proceeded to win that pre-selection and then won Albert Park for Labor. He had a long career in the Victorian and federal parliaments that culminated in the Whitlam government when he was Treasurer and Deputy PM, and he gave Whitlam a notable warning in 1974, which I quote in The Light on the Hill: "For goodness sake, don't have anything to do with this loan business." Whitlam did not follow Crean's advice, and the loans affair became notoriously instrumental in his government's premature demise. Frank Crean's sons were also prominent. Simon became the ALP's national leader, while David was treasurer in a Tasmanian Labor government. Simon Crean's finest hour was his principled opposition when John Howard committed Australian forces to join the flawed US invasion of Iraq, influenced by flimsy, if not dodgy, intelligence reports alleging it had stockpiled weapons of mass destruction. Crean opposed Howard's decision bravely and vehemently, both in Parliament and at the ceremony formally farewelling the troops in January 2003, when he was very clear he would support them during their mission, but did not believe they should be going. Crean was vindicated. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found, and the war had adverse regional consequences. This has been a repeated theme in the ALP's history. Yet again, as in the World Wars, Vietnam, that Iraq enterprise, and other conflicts, Labor's response had been more judicious than the record of their main opponents. Notable contributions from families like the Creans have been a feature of the ALP's history. From WA, the Beasleys and the Burkes, the Dowdings and the Holmans. From Sydney, the Lazzarinis and the Geetzells. From Tassie, the Barnards and the Guys. In Victoria, remarkably, John Cain, father and son, were consecutive Labor premiers. That is, in the 27 years between them, no premier was Labor. The Lemons, father and son, were also both ministers. John Lemon, who served in Labor cabinets with John Cain Sr., retained the seat of Williamstown for half a century, becoming the Australian and British Dominion record holder for uninterrupted tenure of a parliamentary seat. His son, Nelson Lemon, who preferred rural life to Williamstown, became a minister in the Chifley government, where he was especially admired by Chifley himself. Nelson brought to the cabinet a valuable knack of devising solutions to rural problems. At his farm, he had arranged a messaging system with his wife while he was toiling in the paddocks. One tea towel on the clothesline meant there's a snake about. Two indicated another hazard, and 3 tea towels signified come home quickly, the signal that brought him thrashing home in the tractor one June evening in 1943 to be told that Curtin had unexpectedly called the election and there was not a moment to lose in starting his campaign to capture the seat of Forrest, which he proceeded to do. The Light on the Hill covers it all. 135 years of Labor's history. An action-packed chapter covers the incredible story of the Whitlam government, including the loans affair and the dismissal. Even though this only involved 3 years, it's the longest chapter in the book. There's also appropriately extensive coverage of the Hawke government and intriguing episodes like the spy controversy involving David Coombe and Valerie Ivanov, and also the extraordinary Lionel Murphy saga. The Light on the Hill includes coverage of many of the women who've toiled devotedly for the ALP. They include, before World War I, Lillian Locke, the Golding sisters, Jean Daly, Muriel Heaney, Queensland's remarkable Mother Miller, and WA's similarly exceptional Jean Beadle. Notable later enthusiasts include May Holman, Lillian Fowler, Gertrude Melville and Jessie Street. Then more recently, the names you'd be more familiar with, Susan Ryan, Jean Meltzer, Ros Kelly, Penny Wong, Tanya Plibersek, Jenny Macklin, Nicola Roxon and Katie Gallagher, together with premiers such as Joan Kerner, Carmen Lawrence, Anna Bligh, Lara Giddings, Anastasia Palachek and Jacinta Allen. During earlier decades, though, women were endorsed as Labor candidates much, much less often. As I mentioned in The Light on the Hill, a textbook entitled The Australian Labor Party and Federal Politics made a distinctive comment on the absence of any woman besides Dorothy Tangney in federal caucus until 1974. This sober and serious textbook included a chapter called Women in the Federal Labor Party that consisted of 2 blank pages. The transformation in federal caucus since then has been extraordinary. The Light on the Hill, my book, is right up to date with coverage of last year's election and beyond, and as it emphasises, Labor now has more women in federal caucus than the total number of coalition MPs of any gender. The Light on the Hill compares last year's election triumph with other notable victories in Labor's long history and concludes that it's right up there with the best of them. The new content in The Light on the Hill includes the fierce 1991 Hawke Keating leadership contest and proceeds to cover the admirable reforms of Paul Keating's government, together with his remarkable eloquence. Not only set-piece classics like his eulogy to the unknown soldier and his Indigenous address at Redfern, but also spontaneous highlights such as what he said in 1993. "This is a victory for the true believers." And his retort to John Hewson, "Mate, I want to do you slowly." The new content in The Light on the Hill underlines the repeatedly flagrant deceit of John Howard and also explains why he should be regarded as one of the causes of the Liberals' current mess, though he doesn't seem to be seen that way, at least not yet. The updated Light on the Hill is appropriately glowing about Nicola Roxon's world-leading reforms in public health, appropriately scathing about Tony Abbott, and of course features Julia Gillard's denunciation of Abbott in her famous misogyny speech. There's also, as I referred to at the beginning, detailed coverage of Julia Gillard's leadership challenge to Kevin Rudd in 2010. The expanded Light on the Hill pinpoints Labor's fatal campaigning error that enabled Scott Morrison to steal the 2019 election, one of the worst defeats in Labor's long history. There's also the extraordinary COVID era, the advent of the Albanese government and the voice referendum. So lots of fresh content in the new book. I'll wind up now with a flashback to the publication of the initial version of The Light on the Hill in 1991. In 1990, I was working hard in Melbourne to finish the book, and a federal election was imminent. It looked like it would be close and probably challenging for Labor. I decided to assist the cause with a unique campaigning approach. To everyone who wasn't already known to me as a Labor supporter, I said, the election's going to be close, so if you're not sure how to vote, just vote for a happy ending for my book. Labor did manage to win the election, very narrowly, despite losing 10 seats. And as for my unique campaigning, no fewer than 9 of those 10 lost seats were in my home state of Victoria. Thank you very much. Enjoy the book.
Thank you, Ross. Questions? Comments? Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I'd like your comments on the Cheryl Curnow saga when Cheryl came into the party from the Democrats, I think it was at the time.
Yes.
And did you think that was a good thing or a bad thing?
I was delighted. Why wouldn't you be? I thought she's highly capable. She was. This is, of course, before the later revelation of a special connection with Gareth Evans, but at the time, yeah, highly capable. I thought enough left of centre to fit into the Labor Party, and she's popular. So I thought it was a great move. What I thought was not a good move was to give her a seat that was marginal and vulnerable. But that was pretty dopey, I thought. And if she had been given a safe seat, she could have taken that for granted and campaigned widely around Australia, and Labor would have benefited from that, I reckon. So, that's my take on it.
Given your long view of things, what's your reading of the current situation with One Nation, and how do you think the Labor Party should be dealing with the threat posed by these?
Well, what I often say to questions like that is I'm a historian and I tend to prefer looking back than being a current affairs commentator, but I'm happy to answer the question. I think they should take them on. Take them on. It is extraordinary that you have, verging on unprecedented, that we've got an election coming up very, very soon, and the One Nation has only just announced, and he's hardly had any publicity, their leader, only just identified who he is. They've hardly announced any candidates, and they've hardly announced any policies, and yet they're polling extremely well. Now, that might indicate, I mean, there's a difference between the federal scene and the state scene. Now, Labor's clearly more vulnerable in Victoria than they are federally, and that's in general terms, as well as vulnerable specifically to One Nation. Yeah, more vulnerable here. But it is absolutely remarkable, the situation in Victoria, and because of the situation with One Nation that I just identified. How do I think it'll unfold? I think even the most insightful and knowledgeable opinion collectors, that do the polling and everything, even they will not say, they will not predict how it's going to go because it's so unexpected. So far be it from me, who's not a current affairs commentator, to make a prediction, but Labor clearly has to find a way, and I'm sure federally, the highly capable Paul Erickson, the National Secretary, who ran a brilliant campaign at the last federal election, they're thinking very hard about how to tackle things federally and One Nation in particular. As far as I just hope that whoever's running the campaign in Victoria is as capable as Paul Erickson is. Well, it may not be as diabolical for Labor as some people are considering it might be. Is that answered okay?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, just a question about perhaps the shift in the demographic of Labor Party voters.
Yes.
Can you comment on that in the historical perspective?
Yes.
Because to me it seems that we've got people that you would always say, oh, Labor voter, Labor, yeah, for sure, but no.
Yeah, but
And
that's...
some of them are extremes. And unfortunately, I've got relatives that are saying, oh, I've got to vote One Nation,
Yes, yes.
And my great-grandfather was working for an 8-hour day, on committees and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
It's just weird to me that this shift,
It's weird to me too, mate. I think it's extraordinary. But yes, the background of the question historically is of course absolutely right that the Labor Party back in its earliest years, pre-World War I and beyond, was overwhelmingly working class in its members, in its enthusiasts and its supporters, to a far greater extent than is the case now. Yeah, far greater extent. So I totally agree, and I find it as baffling as you do. Yeah, the current state of affairs and why you go anywhere near One Nation is beyond me. But you and I don't understand them, do we? No, he agreed with the shake of the head. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Ross, you mentioned how opinions can be changed. I remember May 1970. Prior to that date, a lot of Australians were pro-Vietnam War, but on the Friday the night, a man by the name of Jim Cairns, who worked there, and he turned the tide, and my opinion was that was a big in helping Labor to come in 1972, so when they withdrew the troops.
Okay, so you're not referring to the
moratorium.
Yeah, we are returning to the moratorium. Yeah. So we were both involved in that, of course. We were at the 72 St Kilda meeting, so we would have been in the moratorium. So, well, for those who aren't familiar with that, there was an anti-Vietnam, anti-conscription demonstration that occupied 4 blocks in Melbourne. Right? Yeah.
Burke Street.
So all the way, 4 of them, full of demonstrators. Yeah. So a very big deal, very influential, and underlined that there are a hell of a lot of the community who agreed with Jim Cairns. Yeah. And you and I.
Oh, yeah.
I was there too.
Oh.
I was only 3. Tell me, in terms of 135 years worth of stuff in there, have you had any challenges in terms of where to find or how to find information and also have it verified, given your stories are so detailed?
I think the main comment, not so much about the verifying, but the contrast between tackling a project like this in the 1980s compared to now, and I was asked this yesterday for the podcast, is that I ended up in the 1980s, I've still got them, these massive files and files and files, and therefore cartons and cartons and cartons of newspaper cuttings, from the 1980s and earlier. And nowadays, it's all digital and you get it off your computer. And I often talk about the contrast between going to the State Library in the 1980s. We all got to war stories. Going to the State Library in the 1980s and trying to read the newspapers on these pretty ordinary microfilm readers, and what that was like compared to just, you know, sitting at home on the computer and tap, and there it is. Yeah, it's transformed. Now, your question was more about confirming things factually, was
Well, challenges in finding
Yeah,
information, getting the detail that you obviously have,
yes.
and verifying it to avoid things like that defamation case.
Yes, I don't think I had trouble finding things and verifying things. The Labor Party is such a, you know, it's in the media the whole time. It was more a case of working out what not to look at, what I don't need to look at, rather than the extra bits that I wish I could. And in the 1980s, you know, they were very keen to assist with paving the way for me to contact people, but I ended up deciding that there's so much written about the party that I very rarely needed to contact anyone, and if I did, it was only going to hold me up and I wouldn't finish the thing on time for the centenary year. So the the approach I adopted was to basically work on what's written and what's in the papers and what's at the National Library in all their private sources, you know, the manuscript collection, and if only if there was some problem of the sort you're alluding to in clarifying something, or, you know, people have said A, B and C, and what really happened was to only then to contact people, yeah, to resolve it, yeah.
Imagine there would have been a lot of rabbit holes you went down, a lot which you had to walk past.
Yes.
But given again, 135 years worth of history, and for those politicians that are still with us, have you had any commentary from any of them? Have any of them spoken to you, given it's warts and all?
Well, there's a chap named Jim Chalmers.
Yeah.
Now,
and the Melbourne launch.
yes. So Tanya
Plibersek
Plibersek and Jenny Macklin were very, very complimentary about the book. But what happened with Jim Chalmers, Judith knows what happened, so she's inviting me to tell you all, is that last month I got a text out of the blue from Jim Chalmers, who I've never had anything to do with, no contact ever. And the text said, Ross McMullin, I'm just confirming this is your phone number. Is it? Jim Chalmers. And I thought, oh, you know, I sort of replied and said, well, yeah, thanks, Jim. Yes, it is me, Ross, you know, wondering what all this was about. And then he sent me a text very quickly after that. That was one of the most remarkable messages I've ever received, or most remarkable praise I've ever received. And he basically said that he explained a considerable length for a text, that in his own journey in the Labor Party, my book had played, the 1991 book, had played a significant role. And he went back and reminisced. He said, growing up in my house, it was not a Labor house, and I had to find my way into the Labor Party in whatever way I could. And the first book I read was a book about Keating, and the second book I read was a Paul Kelly history of political history. And the third and fourth books I read, and he said, I can't remember now which order it was, but it was Bob Hawke's memoirs and your book, The Light on the Hill. And not sure which was third and which was fourth. And then he said, God, I loved your book. God, I loved your book. And then he said, it was incredibly influential to me in my journey into the Labor Party and making sense of it and everything. And then he said, and I actually thought in the 1990s when I read it, how amazing it would be to for someone to actually end up be mentioned in a book like that. And I've carried that thought with me for decades. And here I was last Sunday in the local bookshop with my 11-year-old son, and I saw the new version of your book. And of course I went straight to it and looked it up and had read a bit of this, a bit of that. And after a while, my 11-year-old son said, "Dad, are you crying?" This is Jim Chalmers writing to a complete stranger to tell him this stuff. You know? And he said, apologies for such a self-indulgent message to you, but I just wanted to emphasise how critically important your book was and is to me and others like me, others who think like me. And thank you very much for it.
And he'd seen his name in the book.
And he'd seen his name in the book, which is why he was crying. Yes. And I replied, well, what did he say? When I said, "Jim, that is perhaps the nicest, most special praise I've ever received. Thank you incredibly for it. Not self-indulgent at all. Loved your text, and I especially loved you telling me what your 11-year-old said to you. Really liked that. Very special."
Did he buy a copy?
Well, he did better than that, because a week later, I had a burst of ill health, which ended up with me being in hospital for 11 days. Well, I worked out what it was. Turned out it was pneumonia. And when Albo launched the book, this was in Adelaide, at the Federal Conference, and I'd written the speech, and I was all set to go and everything, and I couldn't go. I was in hospital, and so then, well, who's going to read my speech now?
Your bestie.
That text 1 week earlier ensured that I chose Jim Chalmers to read the speech. Yep. And he did it brilliantly. And he explained, actually, he read my speech word for word and prefaced it by explaining, he said to the crowd, well, this is why you've got me. This is why you've got me, because I sent a text to Ross, blah, 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 blah. And so it was quite a remarkable sequence of events, really. But I was better for the launch last week that Judith alluded to, when Tanya and Jenny McMullin were there and spoke well.
Thank you. I'm going to close off questions now, but you're here for a sign-in.
I am.
For those that would like to purchase a book, they are here behind all of Ross's other books.
Now, there's a special, the book in the shops goes for $55, the publishers have fixed. Now, the prices of those books varied normally, but tonight I thought I'd just, to make it